Welcome to Curious and Unqualified, a podcast about life in academia. I'm Eric Edlund, professor of physics.
I'm Jeremy Jimenez, professor in the Foundations and Social Advocacy Department, and here we are to welcome two professors to talk about AI, Professors Deborah Silvis and Jeff Radloff. So, Marty, could you first just tell us a little bit about your roles at the university?
I'm Jeff Radloff. I'm an associate professor in the Early Childhood Education Department. I teach elementary science methods courses as well as critical media literacy courses for undergraduates. My research kind of goes across different disciplines of STEM, so primarily in science and engineering ed. More lately, I've kind of delved into techno-skepticism and researching how to best support pre-service teachers' critical examination of educational technologies, including AI.
I'm Deborah Silvis. I'm assistant professor in childhood and early childhood education. I teach early childhood education courses, primarily preschool education and curriculum. And I also teach in our inclusive early childhood education program.
Well, since we're talking about AI today, I thought we should start off with a Turing test. So can you please say something to prove that you're human?
I am not a robot.
You are not a bicycle.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so please, can you tell us a little bit about how you found digital technology to positively and negatively impact your life? You can go back as early as you like or just more recently.
Growing up, my parents were very much into technology, and that kind of was my lead-in to also being into technology. I had CD players, boom boxes, lots of sound systems, lots of video games. My mom was really into digital photography as soon as that came out, and so it always kind of felt like technology was around, and so I was always kind of an early adopter of new technologies. And over time, I have kind of become more skeptical about that, especially after it was really the 2016 election that kind of made me start rethinking what I was doing and how I was interacting with technologies, in that case, social media being the technology at hand. And kind of just realizing that the creators might not care so much what happens when these technologies are deployed to the public. It's always played a role in my life growing up, but at this point, it feels like time to really start thinking about pumping the brakes on this, and rather than taking up the technologies as fast as I was growing up, really taking a step back and asking the questions about for whom are these being created, and at what cost are we using them?
I was not and am not an early adopter of most technologies. Growing up, we had a lot of vinyl records in our house. We still have a lot of vinyl records in our house. I think on the spectrum from Jeff Radloff to Luddite, I'm closer to the Luddite. And that's always been inculcated in me from early on, that technology is something we value, but it's relational and not something to accumulate necessarily. So I remember our first family computer in high school that was purchased by my grandmother. I earned that by cooking dinner for the family once a week. So that kind of relationship to technology also kind of traveled with me into my research, where my dissertation study, actually, I followed kids and families around using mobile technologies to really understand how these technologies are transforming family life, everyday routines, what we call the daily media rounds of families, the amount of technologies that we have around us is something I pay very close attention to, and what that means in terms of consumption and the relationships that often aren't seen, the externalities of producing a lot of our technologies, the labor, the materials, the ecological impact.
We certainly live in a time where technology is changing extremely rapidly, especially with AI. Its growth in the last 2 years has been monumental. I remember a couple of years ago introducing the Dolly image generation tools to my class, and I thought that, that was amazing. And here we are a few years later, we're having full on AI created videos and essentially published works. And so this is impacting all of our lives. I'm curious how, as professors, AI is impacting your lives in particular. And on one extreme end, you have professors the Luddites who refuse to touch AI or have no interest in using it. And on the other extreme end, you hear about stories of professors using AI to write letters of recommendation, who are using it in their research to who knows what degree. And then somewhere in the middle, you have people who
Or great assignments.
or great assignments. And then somewhere in the middle, you have people who are using it to do things like assist with their research and help improve their writing. So I'm curious, how do each of you use AI in your professional lives at this point?
I don't use AI a whole lot in my courses. I pay attention to how AI is being used around campus, around our department. I listen to what professors are doing with AI and the concerns that they have. Myself, especially in my field of early childhood and early childhood teacher education, AI plays a minimal role in what we do. We can talk about syllabus statements and approaches that professors are taking to using AI and how I have handled that. But I don't use it a lot in my semester to semester work.
I use it a little bit more in my courses. So thinking about the critical media literacy courses, it's kind of a unique opportunity where I get to introduce AI to the students as kind of an object of inquiry and critical examination. And so, learning about what it can do, what are its limitations, and then how can it impact broader ecologies, like the classroom ecology or society more broadly, and start to unpack some of those biases as well before actually engaging with it. Being an ed tech course, the other part that I see is that students should be using these technologies and becoming, technologically literate. And so for me, I guess it's kind of both an object of inquiry and also an opportunity to engage the students in technologies that they can use to, like Eric, what you said, kind of support them in their teaching through lesson planning or things like that.
Have either of you experimented with using AI in your professional endeavors, like in research, either with editing or in research?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the kind of efficiency activities that you mentioned, like writing recommendation letters and just getting started thinking about forms of writing that I'm not that well versed in, I've used AI to help support me getting started in those ways.
Yeah, I would be in the same vein. So for emails, emails that I've not written before, just to see what it might look like, really kind of idea generators, brainstorming. To go back to another thing that you said, collaborating with AI, I feel like is a very positive use that we could be encouraging, in faculty and students, using it to kind of augment what we're already doing. So, thinking about Wikipedia and how, lots of people kind of put information into that site. Everybody's kind of around this common set of ideas. AI is kind of similar in my mind, where we can make connections across literature, pull literature together. If we think about it as really a large language model that's, drawing from what we've already done, then in that way, this is kind of another tool to create some of that shared language.
And talking about your students, I wonder if you could comment is how it shows up in your classroom in inappropriate ways, perhaps, or even appropriate ways, and what kind of policies you have, if any, to kind of regulate that usage. And have you seen changes over time? Like if you think about the past 3 years, like would you say it's more of an issue positively or negatively now than it was even 2 or 3 years ago?
I almost think that it's, at least in the last year or two, going in the other direction, where at first there was sort of an explosion of students wanting to use these, especially ChatGPT and LLMs, in ways that replaced their work. And I think that many of my students are becoming more sensitive to the ways that we are expecting them to use or not use AI in our courses. So I think there was an initial period where teachers, professors, just didn't have a sense of what we should be telling them and how we should be guiding them. I think as we get a stronger idea about that, we're giving them more nuanced explanations about the tools and how they can and can't be used in their coursework. I think students are starting to use them in maybe more appropriate ways, but I use the word appropriate, lightly, because I think that's pretty subjective.
I guess for me, I mean, I'm hesitant to say how much that I've seen it change, but it does seem to echo what Deborah was talking about. There is kind of this stepping back, I feel like, in the students, and especially when I've introduced more about how it works first, they're kind of realizing some of the limitations, maybe, is at least what it seems like to me. And they are kind of seeking that, should we be using it here? Should we not be using it here? When it first took off, I did have a couple of instances where I was thinking maybe, the student had used it for, to render some writing or generate some writing. But at that time, it was kind of like the accountability checkers were also just emerging. And so I felt kind of like, what do I do as a faculty member to kind of navigate this situation in a way that I'm not accusing any of the students?
So you've used these accountability checkers, and what do you think of that as a product? How effective is that?
Oh, well, mixed bag. I'm always kind of still wondering to what extent that it can actually pick up what's happening.
I serve on the ad hoc AI committee where our faculty's been trying to suss out some of these very same questions. Turnitin, the accountability tool, was the subject of many, many meetings last year as far as its reliability. And I think pretty early on we realized that this was not a tool we wanted to recommend that faculty use. All kinds of problematic issues with it, particularly the false positives.
I've thought about using one of these tools, but my problem, I'm kind of in the Luddite camp, is that I really hate reading and grading anything on a screen, so I ask my students to hand everything printed. Yeah, I know, that's old school. But then what do I do with the printed copy? I can't use anything like Turnitin. I mean, maybe I could scan it back in and then run it in. I don't know. It's a nightmare. So I don't have a great solution for this. I know it occurs. I think my conclusion on this has largely been that this will be a thing that comes back to haunt the students, right? If they really want to invest in their education and really want to put in the effort and do the work themselves, they'll reap the benefits there. And if they want to take the shortcut, that's their choice.
AI is definitely spurring a conversation about the importance of school and knowledge, and not about just what we're learning, but also how and why we're learning, and how and why, what skills are we trying to support the students in gaining.
Yeah, and that's one of my concerns, is that I think a lot of us who talk about how AI can benefit us, we all had to learn how to write first and build those foundational skills of creative writing, writing with clarity, writing with organization. And the fear is that, especially as you get younger and younger, to not have that foundation. I'm very concerned for the ability to have that kind of ability to generate independent thoughts that aren't kind of increasingly structured around what A is starting to look like. So that's why I think whenever we talk about skills, I always want to generationally separate those of us who first develop writing skills between those of us who might be skipping that step altogether.
Mm-hmm. And what is the value in our way of that we learned it versus, potentially what they're doing with the tools?
What is the value and what is the purpose? Because we were prepared for a world that's today, and we're preparing them for the future. And we don't know what those skills are. So a question arises about the goals of education at any moment.
Yeah.
I think according to Jeremy, we should be preparing them to forage and fish rather than use AI.
Yeah, well, actually, if you really take it back, some could argue that, I mean, farming has often been called the downfall of ecologies worldwide because it was the beginning of us removing ourselves from nature and trying to control our environments. But even the written word did something, right? Because before the written word, oral histories, oral cultures were constantly adapting to their environments. And there was no sense that like a word had to maintain its consistency over time. One of the things the written word has done is actually kind of it tries to force impose words from another time on constant new generations that are living in very different worlds, especially today. And so, yeah, so one of the things I increasingly try to AI proof my assignments. I'm on sabbatical this year, so I haven't really been dealing with that so much now. But I do actually think in the future, maybe even writing isn't something that should be a priority, especially if it's something that more and more people are not actually engaging in themselves and they're just kind of using AI as a way to leverage that. So, yeah, and of course the foraging as well.
Well, looking to the future, I think we could look to the past. I've heard some people make the argument that AI is similar to the development of the camera, which long ago people in the art world worried was going to completely disrupt art and make artists essentially obsolete because you wouldn't need anyone to draw or paint anymore. Why would you when you had something like the camera that could give you a better quality product? So do you think of AI in that way as replacing us or augmenting us? And is it going to make some aspect of our lives obsolete?
I mean, I'll jump in. I do appreciate the analogy of a camera. I could see kind of connections to thinking about AI as a tool. The camera, when it came out, was a new tool, and then it kind of disrupted what was going on, and then kind of got assimilated, into the norm and kind of found its place. And so, the fundamental difference being, the camera is kind of capturing what is reality, whereas AI is generating, new images, new text, or at least it's capable of doing that. And there's also connections to, I think for me, surveillance capitalism, data extraction. We're getting funneled by algorithms on the internet to different websites, things that kind of are impacting, not what we're seeing or capturing, but kind of the way that we're thinking and experiencing reality. And so I see it as more of kind of this like paradigm shift, and we don't know what the future is going to bring, or what transformative potential that AI actually has yet.
I think both of the analogies that you mentioned are helpful. Jeremy, the analogy of the word as a technology, and Eric, the analogy of a camera as a technology, they relate to AI in ways that differentiate themselves from this new technology, and also is some overlap. Jeff, I think, highlighting the idea of AI as a tool, the word as a tool, the camera as a tool is useful because there is this category of tool that we can refer to. But AI is also categorically different in that it's from any technology, in that it's learning, and the word doesn't learn and the camera didn't learn. And AI also is a language model. The word relates in some ways as a sort of early model, but it's not learning about language. And AI is now multimodal, and so it can learn and generate image like the camera, but it's new image. The camera is capturing something there. AI is making something that's not. So the generative potential of AI, I think, is categorically different from any technology we've ever seen, and will change things in ways we just have no inkling about.
But at the same time, it kind of feels like interesting to think about the side where AI is kind of using what we already have created. And so there's also this kind of element of being an echo chamber with our words, especially with applications like Grammarly, where it's kind of suggesting different sentence structures or different words. Again, whose words are those, and why are they showing up in this kind of structure versus other structures?
Do you know of, or have you read any longer pieces generated by AI, like a novella or any longer creative works, other than like a simple conversation with ChatGPT?
Not that I know of.
Same.
Okay. Yeah, it just occurred to me that would be an interesting thing to look into at this point. Like how, because I think we've all played with ChatGPT to some extent, and it's fun to play with, and it gives some helpful hints on things. But I've never really delved into a longer, deeper creative exercise with it.
I actually, so I am also kind of on the Luddite technological skeptic of AI, and I've seldom intentionally used it until very recently. And I actually,
Last week,
I used ChatGPT for the first time, and I asked basically, should I be prepping for the end of the world? And I have to say, I was very impressed with the nuance with which it responded to the conversation and follow-up questions. So it was kind of eerily how it had sounded so human in its kind of empathy with like what I was saying and what it was responding. So I have to like put an asterisk in my skepticism that at least on a personal level that was very interesting to engage with. But I'm curious as far as when you think about the future, of course, very uncertain, we can't know. But in general, if you have the spectrum between like excitement and fear, like what often crops up more? Is it the excitement of what this potential could do for you, for students, for society broadly? And the fear can go too. It can be fear of not using it. Like if you don't use this efficiently, you'll fall behind as a career. You'll fall behind as an educator that can help students respond to the future. And fear society-wide, job loss, thinking atrophy, lost skills, etc. So I'm just curious, like on that excitement fear spectrum, how does it play out in your lives? Is one more dominant? Is it very contextual? Has it been changing over time?
So in other words, a very small question that you're asking, very narrow. For me, it's both. If we do figure out positive ways of using it to collaborate with each other, I think that part excites me. The idea that we could start making connections that maybe we weren't able to see when we were digging through individual journal articles or, when we were working with students to be critical about ed tech. So in those ways, it kind of offers new opportunities for both teaching and learning. But the other side is, you read a lot of hype in, newspapers and online about how AI also has the potential to, end the world or, cause extinction in humans. And so it's kind of both, right? So it's like this fear of what's to come or what could come, but it isn't here yet. And in the meantime, there are these kind of biases and, things that are playing out right now that we're not addressing when we're thinking about those future scenarios. But there's also the transformative side. If we can start thinking about how we humanize AI or use it for creative good, then that part excites me.
I'm hopeful about those last couple things that you just mentioned, but I think I'm more fearful and skeptical. I think to have hope in a technology like this, you have to have a lot of trust in late capitalism and some darker forces in society, and without that, I think AI can easily be co-opted, and then we'll potentially learn and co-opt the co-opters. And so I think all of that is really, very terrifying. As far as teaching and learning, I'm more worried about some of the technologies that our students are currently using. I think that they're not using AI to any great extent, and that often we're concerned in talking about technologies like AI that are kind of edge technologies where students are immersed in social media and apps that I think have maybe a potentially more negative impact that I worry about more than something like AI in their lives. We think about the state of students' mental health right now, their social interactions. So some of those technologies I think I would be more concerned about than AI.
Deborah, I think that's a great point about the different resources that students are using and the wide variety of impacts that they experience with social media. With AI, I saw a recent study that I thought was rather concerning. It came out of Anthropic, who they're the company that produces Claude. I think Claude is more popular among scholars because it does very careful citation checking and can give you very accurate results where things like ChatGPT kind of fail in that area. Anthropic has a really great set of research articles they post online, and one of the ones they posted recently was about focused on a study of how students in a particular school, I forget which one it was, were using Claude in their studies. And it turned out that the majority of students that were using Claude were in, I think, the computer science department. Kind of makes sense that maybe it was more on the techie side. But what was really disturbing was that something like 3/4 of the students were using Claude for exactly the purposes that I would hope they wouldn't. It was for the creative aspects, probably writing things like computer code, writing essays, the analyzing, the critiquing. This makes me worry a lot. I mean, it's one thing if they're using it as a fancy spell checker or something like that to improve their work. But my fear here, this is getting back to Jeremy's question, is that we're outsourcing our highest level creative aspects, the thing that we work for in the 4th year of our curriculum in Bloom's taxonomy. We're giving that straight over to AI, right? And our students are jumping to that. And we're possibly losing the greatest value and the greatest asset of our educational experience. So I'm wondering if you've seen this in your classrooms, I don't know if you just have thoughts about this generally, kind of either what's happening now or about the future of education as it relates to AI.
I mean, I've been thinking about it. I'm going to be teaching an online course this summer, and I've kind of been chatting with people about how to like AI proof the course, and also like what do we actually expect for students to do with these tools? And I wonder if there's room to really foreground the idea of transparency, and if students are going to use this, how are they using it, but then also why are they using it, in this certain writing case, why not their own voice? And so not only having it in the front, but then having them describe why they're using these tools.
I did something like this in an assignment. I'm teaching a physics seminar course right now where we read physics articles, and it's a 1-credit course, so the assignments aren't terribly heavy there. The students have to reflect on the papers. Mm-hmm. And I told them that what I want to see in the assignments is not a synopsis of the paper, but I want them to carefully and clearly describe what they don't understand about the paper, which I feel is like something that would be really hard for AI to do, is to say what it doesn't understand about a thing. That was my kind of attempt at an AI proofing exercise.
That sounds like an awesome assignment.
I hope so. We're 3/4 of the way through the semester, and I didn't put any due dates on this, so at this point, none of my students have handed in any assignments yet. I guess they're all waiting for the last week, so I can't tell you how this is actually turning out.
AI can rescue.
Yeah, and then they're all going to use it.
Could be.
I'm actually doing something like that in my science methods course. So for students who can't attend, we have a 3-day trip to an outdoor education center in the Adirondacks. And so for those who can't make it to the trip, they do what I call as an alternate assignment. And so it's a 2-part assignment. The first part, they have to come up with, they have to visit a park and talk about how they would use it for an educational purpose to teach children. And the second part is coming up with a history of the camp. That was the previous version. And so now I've said, all right, have the AI of your choice, Claude, Gemini, Chat, whatever, come up with a history of this camp. And then you need to then come up with some kind of activities to go along with that, including handouts and, resources for the classroom. So kind of putting it, like you were talking about, kind of in the middle of the scenario.
I want to go back to your question about outsourcing or offloading something like creating to AI. I think that students' goals for education may not be aligned with ours, and we think a lot about alignment of AI and its intentions. We want AI as it's learning to be aligned with human goals. We want our students to be aligned with the goals of higher education. But really, we have determined those. Students' own goals for their own learning may be something that we want to revisit in the era of AI. Like, what is a Bloom's taxonomy level that corresponds to the kinds of skills that they need to have to do the kinds of work and activity they're going to have in their lives?
So I want to think about responsibility. And so you mentioned earlier about the ecological issues associated with digital technology. And so the IEA, the International Energy Association, says that we will need, just by 2030, 4 times more energy to run AI than today. And so I'm wondering, on one hand, there's this very significant carbon emission, ecological destruction that's associated with any usage of any digital technology, but even more so increasingly with AI. But on the flip side, if one were to just say the better thing is to completely disengage, to not add to carbon emissions, to not add to ecological destruction, is, well, if others are using it, so that's on a personal level, you might not be able to compete in the job market. On a national level, if some countries are using it as for issues of national security and you aren't, you could be very much better threat. So I'm saying, how do you kind of navigate that responsibility of the dangers by using it versus the dangers of not using it?
That's a very tough question, and in some ways a false choice that we need to decide whether we're going to pursue goals that require carbon emissions or pursue goals that are more sustainable. I think there is the potential, this is one hopeful area of AI that I think about, there is the potential that this type of technology can create solutions and pathways for developing technologies that will help all of us be more sustainable across industries and domains.
For me, I would lean on the side of the harms and thinking about the harms. So, we're kind of trading carbon for, these images or these text generations, essentially. And when we're thinking about energy use in terms of using AI, when you look at the technology itself, there's also energy being put into kind of these human aspects of the technologies. And so I wonder if another option could be getting the companies or the creators to start thinking about, those human pieces or the anthropomorphized pieces of the technologies, taking those away first. Because, why do we even need those? It kind of gets to the purpose of AI and even just the definition of AI. We started the podcast with the Turing test. What other technologies are being built where to be successful is to fool you? And so thinking kind of more commercially or capitalistically about it and thinking about AIs as consumer products, it kind of puts a different spin on the energy use piece, right? So then, at what cost are we using this thing as a product? Can we get by without it? And if we are going to use it, what are the, different important areas or applications that we should be using it?
The fact that we have access to AI at this point for effectively free in many cases or for a relatively minor fee in other cases is pretty remarkable given how energy intensive and expensive it is to run these systems, which must tell us that there's a lot of money to be made by getting us to use these systems. And I think this for me opens up questions of, well, like, what are the larger plans around AI for the future? And I think probably what's happening is right now they're trying to sculpt a set of users and get them kind of embedded with this technology so that in the next steps they can profit off of us in one way or another. I think this clearly leads to lots of concerns then about personal privacy, data protection, security, surveillance, all sorts of things. Looking at that big picture, copyright issues, right, IP issues. Stepping back from the academic world, do you guys have concerns or general thoughts about the development of AI in this direction, either for profit or as a surveillance tool?
Yeah, all of the above, all sectors. For me, I've just been thinking so much about what the intentions are of the actual developers or creators of these things. What are they trying to achieve? Like, what is super intelligence? What is intelligence?
Part of this is just, it's like, why did you climb the mountain? Because it was there. I think that's part of what's going on, right? Is that they're doing it just because it's the unknown and it's fascinating to explore.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other motives there as well.
They also are deeply techno-solutionists. Mm-hmm. They are convinced.
Techno-optimists.
Yes, they're
right.
convinced that there is a technology out there that will save humanity, whatever that means to them.
Like the general, like the AGI, like this super being that is going to come up with these solutions for humanity, which is kind of scary for me to think that people are thinking about that. Given the idea that these are technologies that are really just drawing from stuff that we've already done. And so how do we expect to achieve an intelligence that's going to be better in that way than we are as people already?
I mean, I think you mentioned earlier how one of AI's great attributes is that it can synthesize data on a much larger scale than we're capable of. And so it's possible that out there in the mass libraries of data we've accumulated, there are patterns and laws of nature that we haven't yet observed, and it can help us uncover that. My feeling is that's a pretty slim hope that that's actually the case in a grand sense. I'm sure there, maybe it can help us develop a new particular crystalline material or something like that that has some particular application. But whether it's going to transform the world and lead us to a completely sustainable future of some kind, I'm pretty skeptical.
I wasn't thinking so much about sustainability just now, but medical technologies and the potential for AI to actually develop some cures because of its processing power that humans just can't, and faster, to save more lives. So I guess the definition of transforming human life or saving humanity is a little bit at stake. What does it mean to save the world?
Well, yeah, actually, in that kind of vein, this is more of a kind of speculative, emotional question, but imagine we have a situation where, as we currently are, we are completely destroying our life support systems, and in fact, we create a scenario where we drive ourselves extinct. But before doing that, we've actually created an AI superintelligence that somehow manages to live on its own and extract resources from the environment, and is so efficient at doing so, and finds a way to restore ecosystems and is actually able to eventually send out satellites to the universe, and it actually exists on for millions of years in this form. Very, very doubtful, but just bear with me. I'm curious, if that happened, do you see that as a positive thing versus AI goes down the ship with us as well? Like, do you have any kind of emotional thing like, yeah, well, we created AI, we're gone, but this AI superintelligence still exists. That's part of us is in there. I'm glad that it exists, or not, and if not, why not?
That's a really interesting question, Jeremy.
Eric, you could also chime in if you're...
I don't have an answer. I'm just kind of thinking about rephrasing it. Like, is there some peace of mind that comes from this kind of sense of digital immortality?
That too, but also if you see it as actually a positive, like we managed to live on through this, right, and that's good, or actually we have no right to do that, and in fact we should have stayed in concert with the life cycles and accepted our day in the sun and let it go, and it's actually harmful to export our culture via AI throughout the solar system. So that's also it's both pieces.
Oh my gosh, that's a question.
I guess I'm all in. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
I think I'm having trouble with the thought experiment because I just am more convinced of the likelihood that AI will destroy us, not that we will be destroyed and it will outlive us. I see the end game slightly different.
Or that it might actually destroy us because it makes a conclusion that we are the ones destroying the environment, so remove us from the equation, and actually it might reason it's better able to caretake the environment.
Or it never cared about the environment. I mean, it goes back to the alignment question. What are the goals of AI? Mm-hmm. It may care very little about the planet that we have cared about. Or it may care about it in different ways. Like, what is a natural environment that matters for AI?
Yeah.
What aspect of it would AI care about?
Right, could it care of it in a way that's not just instrumental?
We need this particular planet to be the way it is in order for us to survive, but AI needs a very different environment. And so for it, keeping the world in place serves different ends and looks different for AI.
Yeah, I think I'm hung up on it for like a little bit of a different reason, but for me it's kind of the idea that it's directive based. When we think about we're prompting it with different words to come up with something, it's also an imitation of life, so it can't experience things in the same way. And so, both of those kind of are at the forefront of, I guess I would be terrified if that happened, just because I don't imagine that it could really understand us no matter how human that we make it look or sound. I personally would rather have the kind of text tool that, doesn't take a long time to respond, just so that I am curious whether it's a person or not. I think that for me it's a powerful kind of collaboration and research tool, but I just wonder to what capacity it truly will end up, as a super intelligence that is on its own, at least.
What would be some takeaways for teachers, do you think? And maybe you can go all levels, elementary, high school, college professors, about AI.
For me, it goes back to the questions of, asking about for whom are these things being made, and at what cost that they're being employed with very little oversight, as we've seen with the creators. And, how do we get students to start thinking about those applications as consumer products as well, and thinking about what they are inputting? Every time you're putting in a prompt, it's collecting that prompt potentially. And so, in that way, there is a lot of money to be made by these people just by getting us to use these programs. The idea being that the more data that they could train the AI with, the better that it's going to be. And so how do we tune students into the kind of data privacy and cybersecurity side of what's going on?
Even things like the logins, like looking for the traffic lights, is training IA. It's not really testing for humans. It's just meant to help them train.
Yeah, and the other part is, I think this would be an area to highlight just how passive that we use AI. It's another thing that I try to bring up with the students is, when are you interacting with it? A lot. Every time you open your phone, you're using an AI, facial recognition algorithm. Every time you're searching on the internet, you get it fills in the blank for you. Or using autocorrect in Microsoft. I know none of them would remember Clippy, but, the new programs are pretty powerful and have integration with, the applications like Grammarly, which is even potentially more powerful than what's being used natively in the application.
We're entering a phase where we won't even have a choice about this.
Yeah.
We almost don't already in many ways. I was just talking with a colleague today who was looking at switching textbooks to a different intro textbook. And the thing that she liked about it, which sounded really great to me also, was that as the students work problems, there's an AI tool that gives them hints, right? And it's kind of meant to be like an active tutor, coaching them along, not giving them the answer. And I think that actually sounds really wonderful, because in physics, we have this problem where students get into a problem, they get stuck, they just go look up the answer because all the answers are on the internet. If we could get them to just pause, give them a little hint to get them to work with the problem a few more minutes, like they'll get more out of the whole process. So to me, that sounds great. I think there's some places where AI can really enhance our learning.
We were actually talking about that earlier today. In our program, students have to videotape themselves teaching in the classroom, and they use this application called Go React. And so this Go React application has an AI feedback feature. And so the person that I'm working with in my block, who's over that class, they are having the students look at that feedback first and then reflect on that feedback. And so it's kind of a cool way to collaborate with the instructor of the course, where they're not being so critical of the students. The students are getting this AI generated output to kind of grapple with and say whether they even buy into it or not.
3 points to make about teaching and learning in AI. Hopefully I can remember all 3 of them by the time I get there. The first is that we talk about, with AI, we talk about humans in the loop, the human in the loop. That with the development of AI tools, it's really important that as AI becomes more and more capable of doing things that we have done, that humans have done, that the human stays involved as part of that process, whatever that process is, that we're not handing over everything to AI. And I think about, analogous to that, keeping the teacher in the loop. So if you look forward to, potential teaching world where teachers actually have become obsolete and we just have AI teaching students, personal assistants gone wild, right? It's just all AI and the humans aren't there. We certainly want to avoid that for reasons that we all know. We don't want to be out of a job. We know that humans are really important in human communication. We wouldn't want it to be all human computer interaction. So keeping the teacher in the loop, I think as we're starting to use more applications where AI is supporting us, we want to keep that relationship so that the AI is in service of our teachers and not the other way around. And then another point, so Jeff, because you teach about educational technology and using technologies for education, there's this real distinction I think that's important for teachers and professors to keep in mind, that there's a difference between our students understanding AI or any technology as the means of learning and the content of learning. And I think in some contexts, it's going to be important for our students to understand AI as the content, to be critical about it, to think about it as a product and a tool. But in all of our situations, in everything we teach, we do need them to be understanding it as a means of learning and to know what our expectations are for how they can use that. And the last thing I'll say, and this was a recommendation from students of ours in our program, when we asked them about how actually they did their own study about how pre-service teachers are using AI and understanding AI. So they studied their own undergraduate classmates' use of AI. And one of their major conclusions was, we really need to do a better job of helping pre-service teachers understand how to use AI as a tool for their future teaching. They want us to be talking more about AI and teaching them more about the uses of AI. They don't want us to be afraid to broach that subject with them because of the disciplinary implications or anything like that. They want us to have these conversations and they want to know how to use it, whether to use it, what are the problems.
That all sounds really great. I think as a person who also grew up in a vinyl world, it's really hard to convince myself to go all in on it at this point. And I also feel like an old dog at times. And learning altogether a new technology, a new way of teaching and interacting with the world also seems rather daunting. So I can't say that I'm there yet, but maybe bit by bit I can creep my way up to it.
All right, and I just want to sort of close with one more speculative exercise in terms of imagining the future. Let's go to 2040. I know it's hard to talk about all the potential political, economic, and environmental factors that can send the future all sorts of different directions. But basically, I want you to imagine, what do you think is the best case and worst case scenario for what the world looks like with AI in 2040?
I mean, best case for me would be somehow we're using it in this positive way that helps bolster public good and, is humanizing and kind of centralizing us in the system, and also being used in ways that are creative but not nefarious. Worst case, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what could happen from 2040, but there are doomy scenarios that folks are talking about regarding AI. And it's hard not to get stuck in that hype cycle of reading those stories because they are the stories that grip your attention, and they're also kind of in tandem with the highlight reels that we get from the creators of the technologies, and the more that we, at least that I find out about the creators of these things, the less I'm inclined to be using them in a widespread fashion.
I'll be really concrete about a best case and a worst case scenario because I do think about these hypotheticals. Best case scenario, 2040, AI has helped us cure a number of cancers. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario, AI has required so much power generation that the temperature has gone up so much that an iceberg has melted, caused a tsunami, and destroyed several continents.
Pretty specific.
Good to get concrete.
Not to mention all the the AI use of surveillance that will come during the riots afterwards. Right.
And don't forget all the fake news
Yeah.
covering those riots and icebergs and
The tsunami that didn't happen.
yeah.
That is something we didn't chat about very much, was like algorithms. And, I mean, we talked about social media a little bit, but I mean, just the role of AI in that, serving us up with personalized content, to really just keep us shifting our fingers up and down the screen and
Yeah, and polarizing us because they'll give us more of what it thinks we want to see, and that gets us emotionally engaged. We keep clicking, it profits the companies, but actually makes it harder for us to build bridges across people with different views on things.
Yeah, and when we search for stuff, just how, regardless of what you put into the search bar, it comes up with some kind of evidence for like a reinforcement of that idea. And I wonder personally how dangerous those scenarios are in the negative side of the thought experiment. Are we going to become more isolated and more kind of, siloed? And how do we get around a common set of facts when everybody can see whatever they feel like, and we're getting served up with these personal ads and personal feeds?
Yeah, leading to the personal doom loops.
Yeah. Doom scroller. Yeah.
Thank you both for joining us today. This has been wonderful, and you've given me so much to think about going forwards here. It's really nice to talk to two people in person and not to a computer terminal like I've been doing the rest of my day. So thank you both for joining us here this afternoon.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Cool. All right, until next time, folks.